Okay, so I guess the obvious place to start is the high level cybersecurity in the water industry. How would you characterize, what's the status quo? Where is the industry?
Yeah, there's a lot of change going on at the moment. There's often a lot of change in the water industry, but particularly around cybersecurity at the moment. And I would say that's driven by sort of a couple of things, really. So most notably, the NIS regulations that came into force in May 2018. So those are defining the security outcomes that any organisation within CNI needs to meet. And obviously, a water company is very much part of the UK critical national infrastructure. So that's having quite an impact on cybersecurity and causing a lot of change within these water companies. The other thing is around the digital connectivity. So a lot of the industrial facilities that these organisations operate, traditionally they may have operated older analog type services for remote control and monitoring. Well, those over the last several years plus have slowly been retired, and now those organisations are having to embrace new digital IP communications. Also, a side benefit of that is those digital communications will actually provide lots of additional business benefit, and so that now is driving more and more connectivity. Now, of course, more and more connectivity creates greater and greater threat exposure. So that threat exposure is also adding to the complexity of securing water companies and the industrial systems they operate, because they now need to secure the connections and also secure those facilities that perhaps once were isolated and are now, say, exposed to a significantly greater level of threat.
Okay, and the report you produced, I think, highlighted that the water companies are struggling to both detect and respond to security threats. And I think it's sort of in comparison to other industries that they're struggling more than most, if it's fair to say. Do you identify the reason, or can you let us know what are the reasons behind their sort of struggle to do that?
Yeah, I think what we found is they're certainly finding it harder. So we asked, were they finding it harder in the last 12 months? And most were, and as you say, far higher than other sectors. What was also interesting is we asked about whether they were taking too long to detect and respond to threats, and actually only about 50%, around half, I think it was, found they were finding that difficult, and actually that was quite low compared to some of the other organisations in the CNI sector. So we may well be in a position whereby those organisations that are finding it harder are the ones that are exposed to a greater level of threat, and that may well be driven by that increased connectivity that I was talking about. A lot of water companies are on a bit of a journey with all of this. Some are more advanced on that journey than others, but yeah, certainly perhaps those ones that are driving the way forwards and actually increasing that connectivity may have that greater exposure and might, as a consequence of that, finding it a bit more difficult perhaps to detect all of those threats and respond to them.
Okay, and in terms of the tools available to help them, I guess quite topical, you've got managed detection and response and XDR, extended detection and response, but I think the report suggested that there's quite a low level. So again, back to what you just said, is it because even those companies that are becoming more digitalized have yet to sort of catch up on that, the sort of digital securities, or how would you characterize the reasons behind that low uptake on MDR, XDR?
Yeah, absolutely right. It's that sort of catch-22 situation. You need that connectivity to get that event data from the industrial infrastructure operated by the water companies, so we can get those into those solutions, and then we can monitor for potential security incidents. So as we see that increased connectivity, then that does mean that those organisations then have the capability to exploit those managed detection and response services, and the extended services that come with that. It's probably just that they're not quite at a position yet where they've got that maturity in that connectivity, where they've taken that next step. So what we did identify with our research is that although a lot of that isn't in place right now, it was encouraging to see that potentially in the next year or so, many organisations were considering putting in these managed detection capabilities that are now available to them.
And is it also a question that maybe they don't fully understand what those kind of solutions offer, or maybe even they're a little bit nervous, maybe don't fully trust, because it's quite a big sort of, I guess, leap of faith to go down that route, particularly, as you say, when they're coming from perhaps a non-digital background, to not only start digitizing their business, but also then start trusting their security to these applications.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there certainly used to be quite a significant amount of nervousness about connecting these systems to anything outside of that sort of core critical environment. Even more so connecting out maybe across the internet to some managed service provider, sending all of your sort of critical security events. I think that position is changing. I think people understand how that can be done securely. So that's meaning that they're more likely to use those services because they know it can be done in a secure way. And I think they're starting to see the benefit that comes from these solutions. One thing that's worth noting is there's a lot you need to do in protecting your environment, but that's only going to get you so far. If you've got a highly capable, highly resourced, highly motivated threat, it's very, very difficult with these big, massive infrastructures that water companies operate to completely protect against all threats. And so actually that managed detection and response capability puts some of the power back in with the operators, because if they are breached, what you want to be able to do is detect that breach, or ideally even detect the threat before you're breached. So it's a nice early detection, try and neutralize that threat or minimize the impact that threat can cause. And then you want to be in a position where you can recover those systems as quickly as possible to a state as near as possible to that state prior to the security attack. If you get yourself in that position, that puts you in a very strong position, for example, to combat likes of ransomware. If you get infected with ransomware and you're able to restore your systems very quickly back to that pre-ransomware state, you now are back in control, and you don't need to necessarily be considering paying ransom to get your files back or get your systems back.
Okay, and in terms of another sort of potential problem that the report highlights, I think it was to do with visibility around the sort of the interface between the IT, the OT boundary. So I guess it'd be good to understand why there is that problem, and sort of part two, what can water companies do to improve that situation?
Well, a big part of it will be particularly the larger organisations. Their boundary might not be a single boundary providing that interface. There's a lot of complexity in the services that are provided by water companies. They're doing wastewater treatment, they're doing water production, they're doing water supply to customers. So those different services might have different touch points with different systems, different top-end systems, and those top-end systems might have different touch points elsewhere. So that sort of really clearly defined point at which IT and OT are connected, or OT connects to anything else external from the environment for that matter. Those may have emerged over time without necessarily a sort of defined strategy for making sure that they're all sort of channeled through a really well managed and monitored point of ingress and egress. So really, if you're in that position, and that's the reason why you may be struggling to determine what's coming in and out of your OT environments, then perhaps that consolidation is needed, and seeing if you can kind of reduce the exposure points to as few as possible, and then get really good control over the management of those exposure points.
I'm also wondering, I mean, I know every industry has its supply chain of some description, but the water industry in particular has a lot of subcontractors that do a lot of key work for them, maybe even operate parts of. Is that an added problem, as you say, because they've got this very extended sort of ecosystem that they need to try and secure. It's not just the water company, but it's all their sort of tier one partners and yeah, etc.
Yeah, the water industry relies heavily on third parties for many different things. So they'll be involved in supporting systems, so providing that maybe expert level of support if you've got a problem that the in-house engineers or operators can't resolve. So they may need some connectivity in from the outside so that they can provide that response in a timely manner. There's a lot of optimization that third parties can offer, and that potentially requires them to have some kind of access into your environment to achieve that optimization. So, you know, there's another touch point. There's things like condition-based monitoring, where you can monitor the state of assets and give some early warning signs if those assets are maybe about to fail, so you can replace them before they fail. And there's a huge amount of business data in there that you can kind of pass to others to help you in your business decisions and how you're going to operate your water business moving forward. So yes, a big ecosystem of third parties that, you know, all potentially need some kind of mechanism to either come into the environment or take data out, and yeah, all that adds to the complexity of securing those interfaces.
Okay, and in terms of another problem, and I don't think it's unique to the water industry, but it may be more of a problem. They seem to complain, as I say, many other companies do, about having far too many sort of security, little individual solutions. So it's a complex environment to manage. So I guess, I mean, how bad is it for them, whether or not you can compare it with other industries? And is there a way, whether there's a sort of official recommendation or just some common sense ways in which they can rationalize 40 different tools if they've got, I mean, last time I counted, I think there's over 100 different security categories, if you like. So hopefully they don't have 100 security tools, but how do they consolidate from where they are to some kind of optimized security environment?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this often happens because there's some kind of security objective that needs to be met, and that's met by the implementation of a particular tool to meet that particular objective, and that isn't necessarily done by considering what's already in place. So either by using some kind of tooling that can expand upon what's there already, maybe under the same management environment, the management structure, or it may well be that some of the tooling that you have that's in operation, it provides a variety of different capabilities that aren't actually being used. And rather than putting in a completely new tool, it may be you can bolt on or add on or expand the tooling you've already got to achieve your security objective. Unfortunately, that quite often is more difficult. So if you are the group that are responsible for meeting that new security objective, particularly if there's a time constraint involved in getting that in operation, you may well say, well, actually, it's far easier for me to just put this new box in, this new tool, new piece of software, whatever it is, than worry myself about having to integrate into an operational environment that already exists. Now, obviously, that's a little bit short-sighted because you're really just storing up problems for the future. The problems that causes are you're going to find it more and more difficult to manage a big complex set of tools, particularly if they've come from different vendors, because the way in which those tools are managed could vary significantly. You're not going to benefit from a common user interface experience. So the upskilling of all the people who need to manage all of this is significantly increased. And even if you do that successfully, with the best will in the world, diluting those skills, diluting or increasing the number of tools that people have to manage can only really lead to those tools not being managed in an optimal way. And if you're not managing your tools optimally, then they're not providing the level of threat protection than perhaps you think you might have. And I think it's a far better approach to try and have fewer tools that you've got really good control and monitoring, control and management over, because then you can make sure that they are providing the threat protection that's needed. So I'd say if you are in that position where you feel that you've got too many tools and they are difficult to manage, the first thing I would suggest is, well, look at all those tools, look at the capabilities and see if you've got lots of overlaps. If you've got two tools there which are effectively doing the same thing or have the capability to do effectively the same thing, but you're using a couple of features from one and a couple of features from another, well, now there's a clear opportunity there to rationalize those two devices or those two pieces of software. So you've only got one tool to manage and they're meeting a variety of different security objectives. So I think that would be my starting point, but equally to make sure that that situation is under control moving forwards. You want to deliver all of this with a defined strategy. Really think about what is it that I need to achieve, not just short term, but mid to long term as well, and then understand the security tools that you're going to need to achieve all of that, and then put those in under some sort of defined strategy, and make sure, most importantly, that whatever you've got in place, you've got the ability to appropriately manage those tools. I've seen so many tools that have been put in place and people think that's it, job done. It isn't. If you're not managing those tools properly, as I said, they're just not going to provide the security threat protection that you think they will do.
And I'm wondering, are there any sort of industry standard models of sort of clearly every company has maybe slightly different requirements, but are there at least starting points and sort of schematics that give a rough idea of how many different IT solutions you might need to put together, so that to give people a starting point? Or is it unfortunately up to each individual company, as you say, to go through housekeeping wise, these are all the ones we've got, which ones are duplicated, etc.? Is there an easy way of doing it or not?
No, not an easy way. I mean, it's going to really depend on a lot of factors. I mean, cost is going to be a big factor. There's lots of vendors in the marketplace providing similar capabilities. Some will be more advanced than others. One of the things potentially to look for if you've got to manage a large number of different tools, particularly if you've got a large number of instances. So say, for example, I need to deploy a large number of security gateways because I want to protect each individual site at the perimeter. So if I've got a large number of security gateways, I potentially now want to be working with a vendor that's got a really great management platform so that I can try and manage all of those gateways from one place. So the policies, the firewall rules, the security configuration, I can define once and deploy many, many times. Now there's a price associated with doing that. So, each organization needs to work out, where's that point in which I need the benefit of that really powerful management platform, compared to maybe a smaller organization that actually it doesn't really justify that. And now I'm just going to manage all of my tools, all of my devices on a more sort of individual basis. So, it depends on the size of your system, the scale of your infrastructure, but having a vendor you can work with that seems to meet a lot of your objectives is probably a good place to start, rather than having to go to lots of different vendors to get different tools from different places.
Okay, and maybe as we sort of finishing up, we've covered a fair amount of ground about some of the issues. Do you think, in terms of the cybersecurity landscape, are the bad actors regrettably always going to be one step ahead and carrying on? I mean, I read a report just the other day that suggested that ransomware attacks were actually going down and payments are going down, but that was most of the ones I get suggest ransomware, etc., is still in the increase. But any thoughts as to sort of where we are in that landscape, and is it unfortunately just going to be a constant catching up with the bad actors, or do you foresee a time when people might actually be fairly confident that they've got a handle on their cybersecurity policy, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an unusual trend to see a spike in a certain type of cyber threat. So success breeds success in some respects. So if an adversary sees that this has been successful, this has yielded significant gain, significant impact, whatever your motive is, and it understands, the attack vector that it can now use to compromise the system, or the approach, or the tactic. And once that happens, you almost get like a sort of a snowball effect, where you get a lot of threats deploying the same sort of techniques and tactics to try and achieve their goal. And then there's this sort of catch-up process where we in the cyber community who are trying to defend against all of this, we start adapting to that, and we put measures in place to make sure we can protect against those sort of new threats that are emerging. But the bad guys aren't going anywhere, so they'll just continually innovate themselves. They'll continually innovate to find new ways to meet their security objectives. I think particularly in the OT space, because a lot of the security breaches have traditionally been more in the IT sector. The OT sector has perhaps been less well understood. That lack of connectivity is also sort of not facilitated the ability for threats to maybe compromise these environments. But as they become more connected, and as those threats start understanding how they can exploit these systems, the impact that they can cause, the damage that they can cause, whatever their objective is. Now, I think we'll see more and more adversaries trying to replicate those attacks. So, yeah, unfortunately, it's this sort of continual catch-up that we're playing. It's whenever we see a new type of security threat, we're working out how to deal with it. But in the meantime, the bad guys are innovating and finding new ways to cause problems.
Okay, maybe just finally, yourselves. I mean, are you there to help people? I mean, clearly, different organisations will have different levels of in-house, security and numbers, etc. But a company like yourself, if it's your sort of bread and butter to know these things, it's often helpful for people to sort of interact with yourselves or another organisation, because as I say, you live and breathe it, whereas it might not be quite so central to their day-to-day business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the benefit of an organisation like ourselves is, one, we specialise in cybersecurity. That's what we do. We work across lots of different sectors. So, the experiences that we learn from one sector, we can bring into another sector. We work across different technologies. So, we do a lot in IT and OT, there's lots of lessons that can be learnt there. And we provide a lot of different capabilities. So, we provide a lot of advice and guidance and support to help organisations protect their systems in the first place. But equally, through our managed security services, through the SOC services that we provide that detect and respond capability as well. So, that sort of end-to-end cybersecurity capability that organisations really need to get themselves in a mature position and defend themselves the best they can against those threats. Then, organisations like ours, we're able to kind of provide that sort of expert level guidance to them and provide some of those services as well, but perhaps they can't operate themselves in-house because of the level of specialism you need to operate those services.
Okay, well, that's great. I mean, it's been lovely to chat, so appreciate you giving up some time. So, Glenn, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.